Okay, let's continue with session 2, which would be what assessments are needed for a child with a different brain, like you may have in your class if you're a teacher or if you're a parent of a child who's had epilepsy surgery. This is your cerebral cortex. It's the familiar part of your brain with its folds and grooves. And I think a lot of us are sort of trained or have been taught to think about the brain with these regions, which is correct. The various regions are devoted to different things. So in the back of your brain, you have your visual cortex. The greener part is really associated with actually seeing things, and then the other lighter green would be visual association. Somatosensory would be sensation. Your primary motor cortex would be the only part of your brain actually that's primarily involved in intentional movements. There is some involvement in the parietal lobe with intentional movement, but 100% the motor cortex here has motor neurons that are responsible for intentional movement only. Prefrontal cortex is your higher cognitive functions, executive function, inhibition, that kind of thing. And your auditory cortex here, which is responsible for processing sound. So you've got two different sides of your brain, two different hemispheres, two hemispheres. If you were to, for example, remove the occipital lobe of both sides of the brain, you would be totally blind. If you were to remove the auditory cortex, which is in these folds of the brain on both sides, you would lose the ability to hear. So important to think about the brain as regions. However, it's also important to think about how the various parts of the brain are connected. This is an image used with permission from a fabulous artist named Greg Dunn, who does these incredible micro etchings of, he takes MRIs and slices of them and then recreates the neurons and these fibers known as axons or white matter to show how the brain is connected. You know, various parts of the brain are connected to other parts of the brain in tremendous detail. So this is one of my favorite images that he does. It's a slice through the cortex, through the brainstem via MRI. It's about 500 neurons that are represented. So here are all the neurons in this outer layer. That's your cortex. Some of us in the world of epilepsy surgery are familiar with cortex, or kid might have cortical dysplasia. So it would be deformity of the neurons here. See the folds and the grooves. And then you have all the axons, the white matter that comes down here, eventually goes down into the brainstem to form the spinal cord. These axons, when cut, do not grow back. So we're particularly careful about using words like rewire at the Brain Recovery Project, because these axons do not grow back, and that's known, that's well documented that central nervous system axons do not grow back. Obviously, if you were to sever the axons down here, you would have a massive spinal cord injury and be totally paralyzed. When you cut them way up here, and they continue on until they reach the level of the spinal cord to the body part that they're controlling. Here's your nose. So here are the olfactory bulb here, and then these axons go in to process your smell. Notice how some go down, some may cross. Here's your cerebellum. So again, really fascinating to look how and see how everything is connected. This is a terrific video that is done in real time using, I think it's 64 electrodes on the scalp to show really the activity in the brain. And let's try this here. And we can see how even if you have a portion of your brain removed from the front or from the side, you see how everything talks to each other. So this is why it's our position that you really need to have a comprehensive evaluation of a child. Even if they've only had a little part of the brain, it may affect other things like processing sound or processing vision. If they've had a corpus callosotomy, it's going to affect how the two sides of the hemispheres communicate with one another. If they've had a portion of the occipital lobe removed, the occipital lobe doesn't act alone, so other parts of the brain may now have trouble because this part has been removed, and you can't fully understand this until you've fully evaluated the child. We have letters from the neurosurgeon or neurologist on our website, and all it does is trigger the assessments by the school. So if your child has had a hemispherectomy, for example, you can just download this letter from the neurologist or the neurosurgeon, have your child's doctor sign them, and it's organized according to disability categories of the IDEA to trigger the appropriate assessment. You have to remember that doctors don't prescribe therapies or educational interventions. So don't ask your neurologist or your neurosurgeon to prescribe, 30 hours of ABA therapy per week. The school doesn't have to follow that. So just get them to sign these letters so that the appropriate assessments are triggered. What is a comprehensive educational evaluation? A comprehensive educational evaluation is made up of many different assessments. We'll provide you with an overview for the next session here today, but we also have 2 separate sessions that are planned for the upcoming weeks so that you really understand the level of detail that's needed for these assessments. What is an evaluation? We talked about it a little bit earlier, but it's procedures that are used to determine whether a child has a disability, so whether the school can decide whether they have one for purposes of the IDEA, which again is not the same as being diagnosed as having a disability. Not enough to have a diagnosis. You need to see whether the child has a disability under the IDEA. And the nature and extent of the special education and related services that the kid is supposed to get in school. What does that mean? We're going to talk about what special education means. We're going to talk about what related services means. But what this means to you is those evaluations can't just say, hey, this kid has a disability under the IDEA. They must also explain the nature and extent of the special education that a child is supposed to receive and what related services like PT and OT and speech the child needs. Get these assessments ahead of time. I'm going to talk about that quite a bit, but those assessments also have to lay out the educational, the special education and the related services that the kid needs. We often see this omitted from evaluation. So all the evaluations do is identify the child. They do not identify what special ed the kid needs or what related service the kid needs, and this is wrong. The federal regulations say they have to lay out both of those things as well. Let's talk about vision. Let's go top down. This is how I remember things. So vision assessments, very basic. They would include acuity. How sharp is the child's vision? This is generally fine to be done by the school assessor, not a big deal. You can also bring in your own assessment by your child's optometrist. But it's not enough just to assess acuity. This is, when they pass the test of whether or not you can see the letters on the wall, the Snellen chart, that's fine. You also want to assess for other things. You want to assess for ocular motor control, visual fields, and visual processing. So not just can they see, but how well are their eyes being controlled by their brain? A lot of our children after hemispherectomy or TPO or surgeries that remove the occipital lobe have problems with strabismus, exotropia, where the eye wanders out or where the eye wanders in. They may have problems with visual fields. I have a separate webinar that I've done for Perkins School for the Blind just on the visual fields. After hemispherectomy or any surgery that removes an occipital lobe, it is not a loss of peripheral vision as you and I think of peripheral vision. The medical definition of peripheral vision is anything beyond your central field. Was it just a little dot in the middle? It's more than side vision. It's almost half of your vision that's lost. So you want to confirm that by an ophthalmologist or a neuro-ophthalmologist that can do this. Eye movements, ocular motor control, tremendously important for reading. Your eyes move really fast from word to word before your brain picks up on that word. If you have poor ocular motor control, you're going to have trouble with reading. So again, really important to understand the child's ocular motor control. Third, that vision assessment should include functional vision. What does that mean? It means, how does the child use his or her vision in school? That could be done by a teacher or the visually impaired. And this is a teacher that specializes in teaching children with visual impairments, as well as by an orientation and mobility specialist. And some of these people have both designations. So both of these, so a vision assessment is going to include all three of these different areas. Here is my seminar on vision. It's on Perkins School from the Blind website. If your child has had an occipital lobe removed or disconnected, including in surgeries like a hemispherectomy, a TPO disconnection, a multiple lobectomy that includes the occipital lobe, just go to their website and you can find my webinar there. It's about an hour long. All right, hearing, again, really easy. Acuity, how you can hear, what tones. I think we've all had this hearing test at some point in our lives. That's fine to be done by the school nurse or an audiologist, a basic audiologist, no problem bringing in your own assessment. But auditory processing, what the brain hears and how it processes that hearing, that has to be done by an audiologist that has special training in central auditory processing. Why do we care about this? Well, first of all, your brain has to process the sounds that come in, just like your eyes, your brain processes the vision that comes in. Just because your child can hear doesn't mean they hear things the way you and I do. And if your kid has had any part of the temporal lobe removed or disconnected, that's where hearing is. Remember, we talked about that a little earlier. They are going to have some level of challenge with processing sounds. The school may say to you, we don't do that here. That's not your problem. They have to hire an audiologist then with specific training to do a central auditory processing assessment. So if you get pushback from the school and they say, well, we don't do that here, you say, oh, all right, great. Can you provide me with the audiologists that you have a contract with to perform this assessment? Not a problem. Here's your auditory cortex again. This is the part of the brain that processes sound, one located on both sides of the brain. Here's your visual cortex. Again, very important to have assessments there in both of those areas. Auditory processing, how the brain hears. Dichotic listening, what does that mean? That's basically how the brain processes sound coming into both ears at the same time. So let's say you're at a cocktail party and you're standing there talking to someone and you want to understand a conversation that a couple is having near you. Your brain can tune out the conversation you're in to try to hear the conversation coming from across the room. It's how you process what people are saying to you in a crowded room. Maybe you're walking down the hall and there's a really loud air conditioner. You're able to sort of tune out that air conditioner to talk to somebody coming at you. This is really challenging in children who've had a temporal lobe removed in surgeries like hemispherectomy, temporal lobectomy, temporal parietal occipital disconnection. And a lot of parents will say, my kid hears fine. They don't have a problem hearing. You can't know that. They have a central auditory processing challenge without an auditory processing assessment. If your kid cannot have one, they're too young, they're younger than 7 years old, or they have a challenging IQ that makes it difficult for them to have an assessment, you must assume that they have some level of challenge with auditory processing like dichotic listening. What is a dichotic listening environment? A classroom. You've got the teacher talking, you've got kids in the class talking, and now you're supposed to learn how to read or learn math when you can't process the sounds in the room and you're supposed to tune into what the teacher is saying. Tremendously difficult to do, which is why we always recommend that targeted instruction academic instruction be done in a quiet room for children who've had a temporal lobe removed or disconnected because of the dichotic listening challenges. Sound localization, that's figuring out where sound is. Sound lateralization, whether it's left or whether it's right. Why is this important? Where do we use sound lateralization and sound localization? When we're crossing the street. If you and I are crossing the street, we're going to look for a car, but we're also going to listen for a car. And if you can't localize or lateralize sound, then you may get hit by that car when you're crossing the street. So again, extremely important for a child who's had a temporal lobe removed or disconnected in surgeries like hemispherectomy, TPO disconnection, temporal lobectomy, to have an auditory processing assessment. Acoustic scene, that's pretty basic. If you close your eyes right now, you can probably hear where the air conditioner is located. If your dog is barking, you can point to where the dog is barking, and this can be challenging for a child to do after a temporal lobe has been removed. Orientation and mobility. This is how a child navigates their environment. In static environments, which means nothing is moving. So how they navigate a classroom when all the furniture is just in position. A dynamic environment where things are moving around a lot. So that might be a playground. Familiar environments. It may be a familiar classroom that they've been in several times, but how do they navigate unfamiliar environments like a new classroom or a craft room at the school or a hallway that they've never been on? A good orientation and mobility assessment is going to be done in all of these different environments. They should also be done in conjunction with the teacher of the visually impaired, the hearing specialist, the physical therapist assessing mobility, and the school psych who is assessing cognition, because all of these things can affect how a child orients is not a word, orients and moves throughout their environment. A child with significant cognitive impairment may have a tremendous problem orienting and moving around the campus, so that orientation and mobility assessment would work. Assessor would work closely with the school psych so that that assessment would tease out, how this may be associated with the child's cognition, just using an example. Gross motor, really easy. This is typically something that the physical therapist does. Some children may not need this at all after epilepsy surgery. If you've had a small lesionectomy, maybe, in the parietal lobe, in the back of it, you may not have any gross motor challenges at all. So the kid may not require this. Children who've had larger epilepsy surgeries, children who've had epilepsy surgeries where the motor cortex is disconnected, that part of the brain where I talked about how it is 100% responsible for controlling intentional movement, then you're going to be looking at gross motor challenges. So hemispherectomy, the TPO, corpus callosotomy is also often associated with motor challenges because the two hemispheres can't talk. So the physical therapist will do a comprehensive gross motor assessment to look at the child's strength, their endurance, their balance, and their coordination. For a child with more significant challenges like my son, they're going to look at functional mobility. They're going to look at general ambulation, how fast they walk, how well they walk. Can they go up and down the stairs? Perhaps they're going to look at whether they can transfer from sitting to stand or from the wheelchair to a stand position, or can they transfer off the toilet, that kind of thing. That's going to be teased out in your gross motor assessment. That's how the needs are going to be identified there. Fine motor, sensory processing, activities of daily living, these are all generally done by the occupational therapist. Kids who have significant challenges or cognitive challenges, you are going to want an adaptive skills assessment as well, because you want to understand what their adaptive skills are. Strength, dexterity, coordination is going to be assessed, visual motor integration. Children with more challenges or that are younger, toileting, dressing, eating ability. My son is a food stuffer, so we're teaching him how to chew, or we're teaching him how to bite into a hamburger, but after he gets into the third or fourth bite, he shoves the rest of it in his mouth, and that's a choking hazard. So the occupational therapist assessments are going to really give us a very good idea of where he is in terms of his eating ability, in terms of his dressing ability, and all these other things so that we can start looking at his needs and identify goals there. And speech and language. So speech is going to look at articulation, prosody, very important. Let's talk about articulation. A lot of children who've had hemispherectomy or any of these larger surgeries may have trouble with dysarthria, which is the ability to kind of manipulate the muscles of the mouth well. So look at their articulation ability. They may have slurred speech, or they may have slow speech. Prosody, intonation, and stress of conversation. Does the child talk like this? Or do they talk really softly? Or do they talk too loudly? The prosody, how they speak, is really important, again, because you're looking at making friendships and living independently and having regular conversations with people. So the speech and language pathologist is going to tease out the needs of the child as related to speech. Pragmatics of conversation, we talked about how important understanding the give and take of social conversation is. I think this is a really, really important piece, especially for those in our community who have children that we call higher functioning, I guess, or I don't know, we have to think of a better way to talk about that, who have mild challenges, but we do see that pragmatics of conversation can be challenging for them. This can start to create social barriers as they get into, late elementary school, junior high school, and certainly in terms of finding employment in adulthood and making friendships in adulthood. I think it's really important to work on these pragmatics of conversation from the beginning. The speech and language pathologist is also going to look at language that's different than speech. That's a child's expressive vocabulary, receptive vocabulary, how they process language. If the child has some need for augmentative or assistive communication that would replace their natural speech or writing, an AAC specialist would come in to do an evaluation to see if they need it and whether there should be a specific device to help them. In detail, this augmentative and assistive communication evaluation generally assumes that speech will not occur. And I want to say that there's no evidence to show that using an augmentative assistive communication device will delay vocal speech. So kids who are younger and are still learning how to speak, let's say they've had a left hemispherectomy for stroke or something like that, don't delay that AAC evaluation. You can get them started early, even if they just have a couple of words. It's not going to hold back their development of verbal speech if they also have a device. An AAC device will facilitate the most effective communication possible across a variety of communication environments, situations, and frameworks. So that evaluation is going to look at excuse me, how the child communicates with other classmates, friends, teachers, people at the front office, people in the classroom, people in the hallway, in the lunchroom, with their parents. All of these things have to be looked at comprehensively in that evaluation. It also requires a deep understanding of vision, hearing issues, fine and gross motor issues, and speech. If the child, for example, uses a wheelchair as the primary means of transport, that we really need to understand how they move around in that wheelchair, where that assistive communication device would be placed, how we would attach it to the wheelchair, where should the body, how the child's body should be placed so that they can see that assistive communication device. Does the font have to be big or does the font have to be small? What are the child's vision impairments? How do they process sound? Are they going to hear the talking part of the device? Do they process speech in a certain way that might make it, weird to hear the speech out of the device in a certain way? I don't know. All of that has to come out of that assessment when it's done comprehensively. Educational assessment. This is generally done by the school psychologist. They're going to look at the kids' abilities in reading, mathematics, writing, general social studies, science, the things that we think about as the content of school. school instruction. You really want to make sure that this evaluation includes the big five of the elements of reading. And the big five is not a phrase that we use. This is a well-known phrase in the world of literacy. 5 different things. The first is phonological awareness. This is 100% auditory. This is your ability to hear, identify, and manipulate the sounds, which are known as phonemes, in spoken words. If you have auditory processing challenges, you're likely going to have trouble with phonological awareness. You may not, and that's great, but it's likely. So the school psychologist evaluation, especially for kids who've had a temporal lobectomy or a hemispherectomy or TPO disconnection, should be done in conjunction with the central auditory processing assessment to understand the child's phonological awareness. Phonics, how consonants and vowels work together, that's kind of easy. We all know what that is. Fluency, this is not just how fast a child can read, but their accuracy and their prosody, which we talked about, their intonation. Vocabulary, 4 parts of vocabulary. What is the child's expressive vocabulary, their receptive vocabulary, their reading, their writing, and then finally their comprehension. Do they understand what they read? This is really the most important part. I can read French. I can sound out the words pretty well. My fluency might not be very good, but I could sound it out. I wouldn't be able to understand it at all. It's the most part of reading. And especially as the kids start to get older, the comprehension piece gets more and more difficult. So you always want to understand not only can they read, but how well do they read. Reading is very much a challenge, not just for children after epilepsy surgery, but also generally for children who've had epilepsy historically. Really very important for these children to learn how to read as best as they can. You also want to assess reading level. There are many different types of ways to assess reading level. Hold on, did I skip through that? There are many different types of ways to assess reading level. Let's discuss generally assessments, and we'll discuss some of the reading level assessments. So assessments come in 3 different types. They may be formative assessments. We're talking here about reading assessments in particular. So this is what the teacher might do, like quizzes or 3-sentence paragraphs, or hey, make a diorama of this book, and your kid gets to do a cool diorama in a shoebox. That's a formative assessment. The teacher may do summative assessments, end of unit chapter tests, achievement tests, standardized tests that you hear about that assign the child a grade or a reading level. Those are summative assessments. That's fine, but those are not the type of assessments that we also need. STAR, AIMS-Web, FAST, Lexile. These are progress monitoring assessments. Great, yes, your kid needs them, but it's not enough. You need diagnostic assessments. These are assessments that measure a variety of skills and abilities. They must only be given by qualified staff, and they reflect scores based on norms that are researched to be specific to the test given. They profile a child's abilities and skills. They take a significant amount of time to give, and they must be interpreted by highly skilled people. Just giving your child a quick quiz or a short test or one of these academic, national assessments or the STAR test or any of these other assessments that the school might give, AIMS-Web, that's not enough. That is not a diagnostic assessment to provide us with an identification of the needs that your child has in terms of reading. Don't get overwhelmed by this spreadsheet. This is something we're putting together for you that we'll have attached to this presentation as well as up on our website. But these are diagnostic reading assessments that children need when you're assessing their ability to read. We have various age ranges. Look how young you can go, as young as 4, to start to figure out a child's phonological awareness. whether they can name words and nonsense words quickly. That would mean they understand the rules of phonics. Letter identification, way down here, there's one assessment that identifies letters. These are the assessments that your child needs when you have a comprehensive reading evaluation in school, and you want to make sure that you use assessments that tease out all these different areas. So at a minimum, the Woodcock-Johnson test of achievement, you can be as young as age 2, and it fills out all of these different areas, check boxes, to determine how your child reads and whether they have phonological awareness and all these different things. You want to determine their reading level. This is your Lexile level. So you have the big 5 and then you have the reading level. A kid in 1st grade should be at Lexile level 280. A kid in 5th grade should be able to read a text that is level 620 in terms of difficulty. Why do you want a reading level, whether it's Lexile or something else? Because this is how you're going to start measuring progress as you move along during the year and as you move along through elementary school, through junior high school. This is how you're going to measure progress in reading. Lexile level, for example, the Cat in the Hat is a level 260, Declaration of Independence difficult at 1480. Your school may not use Lexile. Your school may use Accelerated Reader or DRA, or a lot of them use Fountas and Pinnell. That's fine. It doesn't matter. Ask them, what do you use for progress monitoring? For reading level at school, they will tell you, and then you make sure that your child is getting assessed for their reading level according to this correlation chart. Neuropsychological versus psychological assessment. What's the difference? So the school psychologist is qualified to do a psychological assessment, and that's going to really give them a basics of the child's history, their intellectual abilities, and basic academic skills. Neuropsychological assessments are done for children with brain-based conditions. Who has brain-based conditions? Children after epilepsy surgery. So you need a school psychologist to perform these evaluations on the child. Typically, the school will say, we don't do that here. If they don't do that, they have to contract with a neuropsychologist who does. It's not enough to have the school psychologist do this. Functional behavior. This is the key to getting the one-on-one aid that so many people want. Functional behavior is going to look at the child's behavior. Where is the behavior happening? When is it not happening? How often is it occurring? Is it behavior like eloping? They tend to run off all the time. Do they self-injure? Do they talk to their friends too much and that interrupts their ability to access the curriculum? Do they get lost often in the hallway? Should this be done in conjunction with the orientation and mobility specialists? Yes, all these things. Who's around it when it occurs? What tends to happen right before and after? What's acceptable? What isn't? And then from that, you're going to put together a behavior intervention plan. So should changes be made to the physical environment to help the child? Changes to the way information is taught? Changes to routines? Should the child have a one-to-one aid? That's going to be in the functional behavior assessment. Is that aid going to be needed in order to help manage the child's behaviors? Health, very straightforward, typically done just fine by the school nurse. We're not going to talk about seizure plans or anything like that. The Epilepsy Foundation has some terrific seizure plans on their website, but generally health is something that you're going to look at. Those of you who have children with hydrocephalus, this would be a good place to get a letter from the neurosurgeon explaining, what the symptoms of hydrocephalus are. You can download the content from our website. My son, for example, has a hydrocephalus plan, which just means, as soon as he's napping too much at school or he's got his head down or he looks like he's in pain, they call me right away so that I can come in and see if his shunt is failing for the umpteenth time. The evaluations have to be in all areas of suspected disability. They can't use just one assessment tool or strategy. They have to use various assessment tools and strategies. The information has to look at functional, developmental, and academic information, including from you. So this is where you would include it in the letter to the school. These evaluations have to be given by trained and knowledgeable personnel using technically sound instruments that assess a child's cognitive, behavioral, physical, and developmental factors. And again, they also have to address the content of the child's individual education program. It's not enough for them to just say, hey, your kid has these needs, they have this disability. Not enough. They also have to say what the IEP, what the plan is, what special education the child needs, what related service the child needs, so that they can meet the goals that are outlined. Check the requirements in the state regulations, as well as the assessment company's requirements. So when you get all these evaluations back from the school, look at them. You just Google the name of the assessment, and it will tell you what the qualifications of the assessor have to be. A physical therapist is not qualified to give neuropsychological assessments. A school psychologist is not qualified to give certain physical therapy assessments. So really easy to do. Just make a list of all the assessments that were given, and then look up whether the assessor is qualified. Problems with evaluations. Sometimes the assessor is unfamiliar with your child's disability, so you want to make sure they understand that. Things like homonymous hemianopia, loss of half the visual field, really difficult for people to understand because the kid's eyes look fine. It's the brain that can't see. So you want to make sure that the assessors understand the effects of homonymous hemianopia with some of these assessments, like where you have to fill something out or answer a bunch of questions. It's going to affect how the child does that. Is it a screening tool or is it an actual assessment? Look it up, Google it. Some of these assessments that the school is given are just screening tools, and those are not enough. They're not diagnostic. Remember, I said they had to be diagnostic. They may not be comprehensive enough, or they may be incomplete, like the child did not finish the assessment. Look at the facts that the evaluator has. Do they have the right name of the surgery? Did they draw the wrong conclusions about things? I've found a lot of errors in my son's evaluations. So just make sure they have the correct facts. Were the publisher's requirements met? Many of these assessments have to be done within a certain amount of time, like within a 60-minute time frame or a 90-minute time frame. Look up the assessment. Were they completed within that time frame? Sometimes they're completed in 20-minute increments over a 3-month period. That's going to invalidate the assessment, and it's not going to give you accurate details or an accurate conclusion. Again, what tests did they use, and are they appropriate for a child with multiple disabilities? This is really important. Most of these assessments are not appropriate for children with multiple disabilities. They haven't been normed for them. So you want to make sure that they are. Remember, an evaluation, a comprehensive evaluation, is comprised of many different assessments: vision, auditory, gross motor, fine motor, all that stuff. If you disagree with one assessment, you've looked at it, you find it to be inaccurate, it doesn't provide you with the special education or the related services that your kid needs in school, then one of your procedural safeguards, remember, is to ask for an independent evaluation at the school's expense. How do you do that? How do you ask for an independent evaluation? Easy. You say you disagree with the evaluation and request an independent evaluation. Don't disagree with every single evaluation that the school has done. Some of them have to be good enough. If the school has done 14 different assessments as part of their comprehensive evaluation, if you disagree with all 14, you're going to have an issue, most likely. And here's why. If the district has to either pay for you to have an independent evaluation or they have to file due process against you. And I feel like you're buying yourself a due process filing against you if you have, 14, 15 different assessments that you want. Pick the ones that are most important. Do you have to tell the school why you disagree? You don't by law, but it is helpful to provide them with at least some guidance. So typically I'll pick up the phone and I'll just say, look, this is the problem that we have. I'm going to confirm in an email, but the assessor did not look at X, Y, and Z, and the assessor did not lay out the special education and related services. So it's not comprehensive, and we need an independent educational evaluation. The school can limit the cost and location and level of qualification of the evaluator. But if you live in an area, for example, where the nearest neuropsychologist is 300 miles away and they have a 50-mile evaluator radius limit, that's not going to work. You can go and insist that they provide you with mileage or up to 300 miles to go to that other evaluator. Or it might be in a big city. They might have a neuropsychologist that's close by and you need to go to a big city, to a hospital that has experience with children after these large epilepsy surgeries, for example. So that's where you would have it done. Sometimes they give you a list of evaluators. Say, okay, you want an IEE, here's our list of evaluators. Sometimes those evaluators are fine, but you are entitled to choose your own independent evaluator. I live in Los Angeles. We have a lot of evaluators in our town, and I know which ones are good, and I can look at the list and say, oh, okay, Jane Doe is on this list, terrific. She's known for being comprehensive. She typically works for school districts, but she also works for teachers, for parents, 50-50. I know I'm going to get a fair assessment from her, so that's the evaluator I'm going to choose. You do not have to pick an evaluator from their list. Districts must only consider evaluations, whether it's their own evaluations or whether it's an independent evaluation or whether it's an evaluation that you bring in. They must only, quote, consider them. There's no rule that says they have to follow them. It's more difficult to ignore their own evaluations. So this is why you really want to get the best evaluations out the gate by having them perform them themselves or contract directly with an evaluator out the gate. Always request your assessments weeks ahead of the IEP meeting. Weeks ahead of the IEP meeting. Why? Because many of our kids require a lot of different assessments, and there's no way you're going to be able to read through all of them during the IEP meeting, then decide the needs of the child, then identify goals, then identify the special education, all of that good stuff. Also, look at all the things I've told you to look out for. You can't do that if you've received the assessments 2 days before the meeting. Ask for them weeks ahead of time, weeks ahead of time. Okay, we're going to stop here and do identification in the next session.